Imagine a god whose birth is shrouded in mystery, whose rites were so shocking that they were erased from history, a god whose traces are found on ancient clay tablets, long before the advent of the alphabet. His name is Dionysus. We will delve into the darkest corners of myth, revealing connections that will make you question everything you knew about the ancient world. From shocking rituals where participants were rumored to tear living creatures apart, to unexpected intersections with Judaism and early Christianity that boggle the mind, you will learn why the Roman Empire in panic banned his cult and the authorities destroyed entire cities. We will reveal how this god, symbolizing wine and unbridled fun, turned out to be connected with the deepest secrets of life, death, and resurrection. Are you ready to see how one god could change the course of history? His influence is traced to our days, in the most unexpected places. In this video, we will embark on a journey that will change your perception of the ancient world forever. Do not miss the most shocking revelation of the greatest secrets you have ever seen. Meet Dionysus. His appearance occurred on the shore of a lifeless sea, on a steep cape, like an embodiment of youth on the verge of adulthood. A wave of breeze caressed his hair, deep blue, and his shoulders were covered with a purple cloak. Suddenly, as if from the depths of the sea, they appeared, men whose ships glided across the sea of wine color. These were Thracians, led by a rock, destined for them by fate. Noticing the wonderful vision, they grabbed him, placing him on their ship. Their hearts rejoiced because they believed that before them was the son of royal blood, the child of Zeus himself, and longed to subject him to hard slavery. However, the threads with which they tried to tie him were powerless, and the willow rods, as if melted, falling from his hands and feet. He just sat, illuminated by a smile, with eyes the color of the blue sea. "What kind of power, what kind of deity have you grabbed?" exclaimed the helmsman, addressing his comrades. "What kind of god are you trying to bind? Is it Zeus himself, Apollo, or Poseidon?" And then the wind rose, filling the sail, pulling the ropes to the limit. What followed would make anyone freeze in amazement. Instantly, next to the top of the sail, on both sides, a grapevine wrapped around, covered with bunches. Around the mast, like snakes, a dark ivy wrapped around, studded with flowers, a miracle for the eyes. Ivy branches produced berries, and benches for rowers were decorated with garlands. At the same moment, Dionysus turned into a lion, whose roar split the deck. In horror, trying to escape from their evil fate, all to a man at once rushed into the sparkling salty sea. Dionysus, summoning his power, turned them into dolphins. Only the helmsman, the god, spared, saying, "Be bolder, shining man. You pleased my heart. I am Dionysus, thunderous, son of Semele, the beloved of Zeus. Know me, son of Semele, with a beautiful face. My mind does not break away from you, for I weave a harmonious song of the universe." Dionysus, also known as Bacchus, Iacchus, Sabazius, Liber, and by dozens of other names in Greco-Roman mythology, is a deity embodying the natural elements of fertility and plant life. However, he is best known as the god of wine and merriment. His name, found on a linear B tablet dating back to the 13th century BC, testifies to the presence of his cult in the Mycenaean Bronze Age. But the exact origins of his cult remain unknown. It may have appeared long before then. In various legends associated with his cult, Dionysus is consistently depicted as an entity of exotic origin. To understand how ancient Dionysus may be, it is important to realize that he existed before the invention of the alphabet, which makes it difficult to date him accurately. Linear B is a writing system using a syllabic script to transcribe Mycenaean Greek, recognized as the oldest form of the Greek language that has survived. This system existed several centuries before the advent of the Phoenician and Greek alphabets. The first examples of Mycenaean inscriptions date from about 1500 BC, but the use of Linear B ceased with the end of the Bronze Age around 1200 BC. Dionysus appears during this period. John L. Casey revealed a monumental archaeological find at the sanctuary of St. Irene in Caia, illustrating enduring religious practices dating back to the 13th century BC. The oldest recorded dedication in this sanctuary recognizes Dionysus as a revered god. Another exemplary example of a Linear B inscription found during excavations in the square of Agia Atene on Casta Hill serves as a significant representation of late Minoan religious rites. It mentions Divus, Zeus, and Divus, Dionysus. This inscription tells of an offering of honey to Zeus and Dionysus and indicates the presence of a sanctuary dedicated to Zeus and Cydonia, Zeus, whose genitive dios is historically associated with the prefix dio in ancient Greek, meaning God. This suggests that various forms of the name may indicate the original Dionysos. In the 6th century BC, Pherecydes of Keros suggested that Nysa, an ancient word for tree, may be related to Mount Nysa, the mythological birthplace of the god Dionysus, where he was cared for by nymphs called naiads. Perhaps this word is related to both the tree and Mount Nysa. Homer describes, "There is once Nysa, a high mountain, thickly covered with cedar forests, in Phoenicia, from afar, near the Egyptian waters." A vase created by Sophilos attributes names to the naiads. Some ancient scholars placed Nysa in Boeotia, the homeland of Dionysus's mother, Semele. Mounts Helicon and Eliphius, in the village of Elephe, were considered possible locations. Thrace was another potential location, perhaps because of the god's early worship in the region. The Caucasus, another suggested site, was on the eastern edge of the known world, as Dionysus was believed to have entered Greece from the east. In the 5th century BC, Herodotus of Halicarnassus was aware of a mountain named Nysa, located in Ethiopia, possibly referring to Jebel Barkal, a place where ancient Nubians made sacrifices to Amun. Mika of Calatia, who lived around the same time as Herodotus, seems to have adopted this idea, moving Nysa to Arabia, perhaps associating it with an Arabian deity known to the Greeks as Auralia. Diodorus Siculus quotes Antimachus, but also documents a tradition placing Nysa in Libya. This relocation may have been caused by the veneration of Sadaria in Phoenician colonies along the Libyan coast. Moreover, Diodorus recounts ancient legends placing the god's birth in various locations, including Elis, Egypt, Naxos, or Teos. Regardless of its origin, this means that Dionysus cannot be dated earlier than the 13th century BC, but perhaps even older, perhaps even the Copper Age. Naos in Crete may be the oldest city in the world, with archaeological evidence dating back to 7000 BC in the Late Stone Age. This island is rich in copper and is one of the leading possible locations for the start of the Copper Age, which began around 3500 BC. The Minoans thrived during this period. Linear B, in which the name Dionysus is found, is generally considered to have evolved from Linear A, a hieroglyphic script that the Minoans used in one of the oldest forms of writing on Earth. In Minoan Crete, especially in Naos, the name Panphaeus, a term from later Dionysian mythology meaning suffering, was often given to men. It was a common name for the simple class. The Hungarian philologist Kerényi suggested that assigning such a name to a child likely implies a significant spiritual connection, perhaps as a decoding for Dionysus himself, who, according to his mythology, is a deity destined to endure and then overcome suffering. In later narratives, Panphaeus undergoes agony at the behest of Dionysus's disciples, hinting at a deep spiritual entanglement. According to Kerényi's analysis, he further suggests that the term "the man who suffers" originally referred to a deity before being assigned to specific individuals as the narrative evolved. Carl A. Ruck points out that Panphaeus and Dionysus are mirror images of each other. In Euripides' famous 6th century BC play The Bacchae, the story of Panphaeus is closely related to the story of Jacob and Esau. In both stories, the birthright is stolen by Jacob or Dionysus from other family members. Jacob and Esau are both sons in the house of Isaac, while Dionysus and Panphaeus are both sons in the house of Cadmus. The name Jacob in Hebrew, Yaakov, is strikingly similar to Dionysus's alternative name, which is Yahos. Returning to Homer's words, "There is once Nysa, a high mountain, thickly covered with cedar forests, in Phoenicia, from afar, near the Egyptian waters." Herodotus also states that only two gods worshipped by the Arabs in the Sinai region were Dionysus and Aphrodite. Throughout the Old Testament, Dionysian imagery is present everywhere. The temple built by Solomon is described as having golden vines entwined with ivy, with clusters of golden grape berries, and cherubim, similar to goats, adorn the Holy of Holies. Satyrs and grapevines with ivy and clusters are a combination that makes Dionysian imagery unmissable. Dionysus himself is depicted as a horned satyr leading an army of satyrs into battle, and they wear ivy wreaths. Many Roman and Greek authors also believed that the Jews worshipped some form of Dionysus. I will return to this issue when I talk about the Asian Dionysus, known as Sabazius. The Chaldean oracles state, Dionysus, or Bacchus, was called by the Chaldeans Iaho in Phoenician, and is often called Sabbath, as he who is above the 7 spheres, called the Demiurge. In the Navian kingdom, the analogue of Dionysus was a great god named Dushara, or Dukux, he who is from Shara, from the name of the mountain towering over Petra in Arabia. Dushara was expected to bring justice if he was invoked through the correct ritual. Epiphanius of Salamis writes of Dushara as being born of a virgin named Kabu, which equates to the queen of the underworld, Persephone. This is interesting because Dionysus of the Black Sea region was born of Kubaba, later known as Cybele, and she was often equated with Persephone. This will also appear later in the video. The reason we know Dushara was associated with Dionysus is that he also had a temple in southern Italy that was used until the 1st century. He is depicted in his usual clothes, holding the thyrsus, which Dionysus holds. Dionysus is also considered by Herodotus, Diodorus, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, Strabo, as well as in the Orphic and Homeric hymns, the equivalent of the Egyptian god Osiris. More on this later. All these factors show that the Dionysian religion of the Bronze Age was so widespread that it was possibly practiced in some form all over the world, in all cultures that engaged in grape growing. Some ancient authors, such as Nonnus, believe that he was even revered in lands beyond India to the east. Padot of Rhodes tells the story of a group of Bacchae living far to the west, on an island in the Atlantic Ocean, who lived in a matriarchal society and worshipped only Dionysus, According to their legends, they sent virgins to the mainland once a year to become pregnant. If a boy was born, they chanted Eva and tore him apart, eating him as the infant Dionysus, torn apart and eaten by the Titans. If a girl was born, she was raised as a Bacchae. The evidence clearly shows that the Dionysian cult was known throughout the ancient world. Other possible origins of Dionysus, his Thracian roots from the Black Sea and Caucasus region, another ancient kingdom that flourished in the Copper Age, are even more interesting and compelling. Current findings indicate that the original cultivation of grapes occurred in the South Caucasus, now Georgia, around 6000 BC, and then, in the 5th millennium BC, was brought to the Sumerians in present-day southern Iraq. In addition, it was Phoenician merchants who transported the original vines from these regions to their land, modern Lebanon, contributing to the development and production of wine. According to the Bible, Noah was the first winemaker. His ark, as the Bible claims, about 5,000 years ago, crashed on Mount Ararat, in this exact region where grape cultivation was discovered. Evidence of a grapevine god in the form of Sabazius was considered the oldest and most revered among the Cappadocians and Phrygians, who also revered the great mother Cybele. Sabazius and Cybele are believed to be husband and wife. There is archaeological evidence for this, dating back to 6000 BC, in the form of kubaba. I will talk about this later in the video, but the fact that grape and wine cultivation was discovered in this region adds more credibility to the possibility that the grapevine god was also first revered here. According to Cicero, there were at least 5 different traditions of Dionysus. As he states in On the Nature of the Gods, written in the 1st century BC in Latin, we have several bearers of the name Dionysus. The first is the son of Jupiter and Proserpina. The second, who is said to have killed Nysa, is the son of the Nile. The third is the son of Cabal. He is said to have been king over Asia, and the Sabazia were established in his honor. The fourth is the son of Jupiter and Luna, and it is with him that the Orphic rites are believed to be associated. The fifth is the offspring of Nisus and Thyane, and the alleged founder of the Thracians. The general story of Dionysus is that he is the offspring of Zeus and Semele, the daughter of Cadmus, the king of Thebes. Hera, the spouse of Zeus, driven by envy, manipulated the pregnant Semele to test the divine nature of her beloved, forcing him to reveal his true essence. Zeus, fulfilling her request, manifested his true form, but his immense power proved too strong for the mortal Semele, leading to her destruction by lightning. However, Zeus managed to save his son by enclosing him in his thigh until he matured, making Dionysus born twice. Subsequently, Dionysus was entrusted to the care of the Bacchae, also known as the Maenads, considered fictitious, under the guidance of the deity Hermes. However, his title of born twice also has a deeper meaning. There are other legends about Dionysus which are said to precede this story. In the mystery cults of ancient Greece, transmitted through fragments of Orphic hymns kept secret, his true origin is Zagreus, the divine child of Persephone and Zeus, who was chosen to be king of the universe after Kronos and Zeus. Although immediately after his birth, the infant Zagreus Dionysus was torn to pieces, boiled, and eaten by the evil Titans, his heart was saved by Athena, and Dionysus was resurrected by Zeus through Semele. Zeus struck the Titans with lightning, and they were consumed by fire. From their ashes sprang the first humans, who thus possessed both the evil nature of the Titans and the divine nature of the gods. The central story of Orphism revolves around the suffering and death of Dionysus at the hands of the Titans and his subsequent resurrection. This narrative in Orphic thought emphasizes the dual essence of humans, the corporeal aspect derived from the Titans and the divine essence or soul from Dionysus. To be liberated from the material world associated with the Titans, one needed to be initiated into the Dionysian rites and experience telet, a ceremonial purification involving a re-experiencing of the god's suffering and death. The Orphics believed that after death, they would eternally coexist with Orpheus and other legendary figures in the Elysian fields, a realm in Hades ruled by Saturn. Conversely, they thought that those who were not initiated would face endless cycles of reincarnation. Orpheus was the high priest of Dionysus and is credited with several hymns to Dionysus and Sabazius. It is said that Orpheus gave his disciples secret wisdom that they could carry into Hades after death, allowing them to escape the cycles of reincarnation and death. Here is a memory hymn. When you are about to die, you will go to the spacious halls of Hades. A spring is on the right, and a bright cypress stands near it. There the descending souls of the dead refresh themselves. Do not approach this spring by any means. Further on, you will find refreshing water flowing from the lake of memory, but guards are near. They will ask you with sharp minds what you seek in this misty shadow of Hades. Say, I am a child of earth and starry heaven, Gaia and Uranus, and I am thirsty and dying, but quickly give me refreshing water from the lake of memory. And then they will tell the underworld king Pluto, and then you will be given a drink from the lake of memory, and you will go on the sacred road that other glorified initiates of Bacchus travel. Thus, an Orphic initiate, by following these instructions, could enter heaven and be saved. The Orphics' focus on piety and salvation from death greatly influenced the later Pythagorean, Platonic, and Judeo-Christian theologies that followed. In Thebes, Dionysus was opposed by his cousin Panphaeus, who was torn to pieces by Maenads when he attempted to spy on their activities. The Athenians were punished with impotence for disrespecting the god's cult, despite the resistance of their husbands. Women would rush to the hills, clad in fawn skins and ivy wreaths, chanting the ritual cry, Ava. They formed sacred fraternities, brandishing thyrsi, fennel staffs bound with grapevines and topped with pine cones. They danced by torchlight to the rhythm of aulos, a double flute, and hand drums. Inspired by the god, Maenads were believed to possess cultic power and the ability to charm snakes, suckle animals, and also a supernatural strength that enabled them to tear living victims apart before a ritual feast. The Maenads revered the god under the titles of loud-sounding, born, bold, believing that he embodied the sacrificial animal. Aristophanes wrote Frogs in the 5th century BC, telling the story of Dionysus, whom he refers to as Iacchus, descending to Hades to resurrect the dead. The plot unfolds with Dionysus, disguised as Heracles, traveling with his servant Xanthias on a donkey to visit Heracles. Dionysus's attire amusingly surprises Heracles. Dionysus inquires about the path to the underworld to bring back the poet Euripides to Athens and the potential difficulties they might encounter. Upon receiving guidance from Heracles, the duo sets off. Dionysus is transported across the lake by Charon, while Xanthias, being a slave, has to walk around it. Frogs serenade them during their journey, initially annoying and then amusing Dionysus, who participates in their joyous melodies. Brekkekekex, coax, coax. Dionysus engages in a comical dispute with the frogs. Dionysus and Xanthias encounter the creature Empusa, terrifying Dionysus. Soon, a chorus of initiates sings hymns to Iacchus, Demeter, and Persephone. A rival meets hostility due to Dionysus's disguise as Heracles. The confusion in their identities and subsequent interactions introduce comedic elements to the play. Come, awake from sleep, kindling the fiery torches. O Iacchus, star of the morning, that shinest in the night. The meadow burns brightly. The aged are sorrowful. Their old knees are bent with joy. Lift up your sparkling torches, O Marshal, all thy stainless brood. Lead us onward. Lead the beautiful, youthful choir. Inside, a conflict arises between Aeschylus and Euripides over poetic supremacy, with Dionysus as the arbiter. A series of debates and contests reveal their different poetic styles and philosophies, where Euripides presents his work as more modern and relatable, while Aeschylus defends the grandeur and depth of his compositions. Unable to make a decision, Dionysus resorts to weighing their verses, leading to Aeschylus's victory due to the profound themes in his work. Subsequently, reflections on the political figure Alcibiades are requested from both poets. Ultimately, Aeschylus is declared the absolute victor, and the group departs for a feast. Aeschylus leaves his esteemed seat to Sophocles upon his departure to the mortal realm, concluding with praises to Aeschylus and hopes for his wise counsel to Athens. Dionysus successfully resurrects the dead poet. This comedy was known by many to be an allegory for the ancient Eleusinian mysteries. These mysteries were practiced by hierophants, who conducted secret initiation ceremonies. The purpose of the initiation was to obtain salvation and eternal life through participation in the rites of Dionysus and Demeter, representing the vine and the grain. There was a sacred Eucharist. The wine was the spirit of Dionysus, and the bread was the spirit of Demeter, a goddess whom Zeus fell in love with, whose daughter, Persephone, was abducted by Pluto. In secret hymns, Dionysus' adherents were considered among creatures symbolizing fertility, including satyrs and Selene. The phallus held a significant place in his ceremonies. Dionysus often assumed a wild, animalistic form and found connection with a diverse array of fauna. His distinctive symbols included an ivy wreath, a thyrsus, and a cantharos, a large cup with two handles. Early Greek depictions portrayed him as a bearded man, but subsequent renderings showed him as young and effeminate. Scenes of Bacchic revelry were a common theme for those painting vases. The Eleusinian mysteries were the most famous among Dionysian spiritual practices throughout world history. Annually, initiates convened for rituals dedicated to Demeter and Persephone at the famed Eleusinian sanctuary in ancient Greece. Often described as the most renowned secret religious practices of ancient Greece, these rites were rooted in an ancient agricultural tradition, suggesting their evolution from Mycenaean Bronze Age ceremonies. The rituals mirrored the narrative of Persephone's abduction by Pluto, the king of the underworld, and detailed three primary stages: the descent, the search, and the ascent, culminating in Persephone's reunion with Demeter. This celebration served as a central event during the Hellenistic period and later found its place in Rome. Parallel ceremonies are visible in agricultural communities in the Near East and Crete. Throughout history, The specific details of these ceremonies, rites, and doctrines were meticulously guarded to those who were initiated. Persephone's resurgence symbolized the unending cycle of life, passed down through generations, and they believed in receiving blessings in the afterlife. Artistic depictions of the mysteries, such as paintings and ceramics, abound, given the mysteries showcased visions of the afterlife and their enduring appeal and continuation of practices for 2,000 years are attributed to psychoactive substances. The town name Eleusinian appears to be of non-Greek origin and may correlate to the Elysian fields and the deity Eleus. The ceremonies were held annually, with the lesser mysteries celebrated in the spring, and those who underwent preliminary purification would participate in the greater mysteries in September. Devotees would travel the sacred path from Athens to Eleusinian, invoking Kore, the maiden, and reenacting Demeter's search for her abducted daughter. Upon arriving in Eleusinian, participants would stop at the same well where Demeter had once rested, observe a fast, and then consume a drink made of barley and mint known as Kykeon. This concoction contained the hallucinogenic fungus ergot, enhancing the overall mystical experience. Post-consumption, participants would proceed to the Telesterion, an underground chamber to witness a confidential ceremony. It is widely believed that this rite symbolically recreated the death of Dionysus and subsequent resurrection, where viewers may have played a part. Initiates were to symbolically die by drinking Kykeon and be reborn through the god taking their body and making them holy. There was Eucharist, followed by an orgiastic dance. Then the phallus of Dionysus was brought out. Initiates would take the phallus from a chest and repeat these words: "I have fasted, I have drunk the cup, I took from the chest. Having done that, I placed in the basket, and from the basket into the chest." This went on until dawn. After this were baptisms, sacred births. Initiates reported feeling transformed upon witnessing the dawn, and no longer fearing death. What took place in the Telesterion remains shrouded in mystery, but we do have snippets of evidence of how powerful the rituals were. Notably, many influential figures and luminaries from the ancient world were initiated into the mysteries: Plato, Socrates, Olympus, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, Augustus, Marcus Aurelius, to name a few. Nicholas of Damascus writes of Brahmins from India traveling all the way through Greece to be initiated. To these accounts may be added the story of Nicholas Mason. This writer claims that in Antioch, close to Daphne, he met ambassadors from India sent to Augustus Caesar. From the letter, it followed that there was a mention of several Brahmins, but only 3 survived whom he saw. The rest had perished, mainly because of the length of the journey. The Brahmins presented gifts that had been brought: a statue of Hermes without hands, incense, oils, tigers, large snakes, a snake 10 cubits long, a river tortoise 3 cubits long, and a partridge bigger than a vulture. They were accompanied by a Brahmin, Zagreus. For some reason, after his initiation into the Eleusinian mysteries, he wished to die, because he wanted to demonstrate this for the benefit of Augustus and the Athenians. He was therefore initiated into the mysteries of Dionysus and Demeter, which were held out of season, according to their account, because of Augustus, who was also an initiate. And Zagreus then threw himself alive into the fire and died. His tomb had the following inscription: Zariman, an Indian from Haruchi, who glorified himself by the custom of his country. Here lies Dionysus. Dionysus possessed the ability to inspire inspiration and ecstasy. His worship held profound significance in the realms of arts and literature. In Athens, dramatic performances of tragedy and comedy were an integral part of two Dionysian festivals, the Dionysia and the Great Dionysia. Moreover, Dionysus received tribute through lyrical poetry known as dithyrambs. However, in Roman accounts, his character is often distorted, reduced to the mirthful figure of Bacchus, a favored figure in festive banquets. The Bacchanalia were officially banned in Italy in 186 BC. A major event in the history of the Roman Republic occurred. A group of runaway slaves and plebeians led a revolt in the northern wilds of Rome, led by women. Pucula Annia is believed to have led the Dionysus mysteries, known as the sacred orgies, starting circa 188 BC. Livy portrays Bacchanalia as a ceremony exclusive to women, held during the daytime only 3 times a year. However, Pucula Annia changed these ceremonies to nighttime, increased their frequency to 5 times a month, and made them accessible to all genders and social standings. She also made the consumption of wine, along with acts of violence and compulsory intimate encounters, a staple part of the initiation process. The most vulnerable, including the lower classes, slaves, women, gays, the young, and those seen as morally weak, were thought to be the most affected, but even men from the higher classes were not exempt. Livy reports that men dressed as women and women as men, and homosexual relations were encouraged. A former participant and courtesan, Hispala Ficenia, despite fearing retribution from the cult, revealed its activities to the appalled Roman Senate. After careful examination, the Senate took measures to dismantle the cult, believing this action would avert an impending divine retribution upon Rome. Livy reports that about 6,000 people were executed, and among those arrested was Minucius Carinus, Pucula's son. The law against or restructuring of the cult is documented in the Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus, which still exists, and forbade them in 186 BC. Pucula's ultimate fate remains a mystery. Bacchus festivals were then outlawed for the next 20-40 years. Due to this, the Bacchus festivals, influenced by the Greek Dionysius, were amalgamated with the ancient festival of Liber and held in private, similar to the ancient Burning Man. They usually consisted of heavy wine consumption, music, satyrs, and poetry contests. In Greece, there were 4 annual festivals of Dionysus: the Dionysia, the Lenaea, and the Anthesteria. 2 of the 4 were called Dionysia, the rural Dionysia and the city Dionysia. Much like the Bacchanalia, they took place at different times of the year, with theatrical performances of dramatic tragedies as the central events. Following the completion of the plays, contests of dancing and singing were held, and choirs performed dithyrambs. Central to the event was the Pompey procession, in which phalluses were carried by phallophoroi. Lenaea took place in Delphi during the spring season as an agrarian festival. It was celebrated at a critical juncture to propitiate the awakening of nature, particularly grapes and the vine, symbolized by the god himself, his death, and return from the underworld. While it was not a time for harvesting grapes, it was rather a time for pruning the vines. Visitors hailed Iacchus, son of Semele, Eva Iaccho, Saba, Eva Iaccho, Saba, carrying torches at night. The 4th and last Dionysian festival, the Anthesteria, was celebrated on the first full moon of winter. The 3 days of the festival were called Pythoegia, Choes, and Kytroi. The Anthesteria also had aspects of a festival of the dead. People mourned the death of Dionysus. If we turn to the ancient Copper Age of Sumer, we find several Dionysian traits among various deities. Nishida, whose name means Lord of the Good Tree, has a precise word-form match with what Pherecydes of Syros thought Dionysus meant, God of the Tree. He was a Mesopotamian deity of vegetation, the underworld, and sometimes war. He was commonly associated with snakes, libations, and wine. Like Dumuzi, he was believed to spend part of the year in the land of the dead. Ningal is linked to Dumuzi due to their shared traits as vegetation deities who undergo death. The god Damu seems to be a synchronization of both Nishida and Dumuzi. It is widely accepted that Dumuzi was brought to Lebanon and Syria by the Assyrians in the Iron Age and called Adonis, but his association with Dionysus predates this evolution. Both Dionysus and Adonis are ritually mourned in the rites of the Syrians, the Phoenicians, and in Delphi, where the mourning of Dionysus took place at the foot of Mount Delphi, where his tomb was. Initiates into the Eleusinian mysteries also practiced the ritual mourning of Dionysus. We also see similar rituals mourning Osiris, Asclepius, and Adonis, all possibly setting the stage for the lamentation of Jesus. Strangely enough, the Sumerians also ritually mourned the deaths of Dumuzi and Nishida. Dumuzi is mourned by Inanna, and the Lament for Dumuzi ritual is mentioned in the Hebrew Bible by Ezekiel, indicating the widespread popularity of this rite. Then he brought me to the door of the Lord's house, which was toward the north, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Ezekiel, a lamentation called In the Desert, mentioned by early Greeks, mentions both deities, Nishida and Dumuzi, as objects of lamentation. This connection is also reflected in astrological texts. Some lamentations even equate Nishida and Dumuzi as identical entities, given their roles as denizens of the underworld. There are instances where they are both associated with Gilgamesh. In the Middle Babylonian narrative of Apap, Ningal is portrayed as one of two guardians of Anu's celestial dwelling, sharing this role with Dumuzi. This story seems to suggest that upon death, these two deities dwell in the celestial spheres rather than the underworld, or that they took turns descending and ascending. Traditionally, the disappearance of both Nishida and Dumuzi was believed to occur annually between midsummer and midwinter. What is so interesting about this is the similar duality we see in Dionysus and Apollo. Athenian calendars of the classical era portray Apollo and Dionysus as lords of the two major seasons. They believed that after the harvest, Apollo would depart north to the lands of the Hyperboreans and perform his music, invoking the winter aurora borealis. During this time, Dionysus would rule from the underworld and bring mirth and joy to the winter time. Then, in the springtime, the death and sacrifice of Dionysus would cause the crops to grow, and Apollo would rule from the heavens, and his light would be a blessing for the entire summer until the harvest. Harvard philologist Carl A. Ruck proposes the idea that the gods Dionysus and Apollo are in fact two spirits of the same divine persona. He points out that they are never depicted together, but because they are both princes of Zeus and mediators between God and humans, similar to the dual nature of Mithras, regarded as cathartic and solar, who is also a mediator for Ahura Mazda and Zarathustra. Dionysus is the liberation of the soul from within, chthonic. Apollo is justice handed down from above, celestial. What we have in Dionysus is a god of inspiration, freedom, equality, arts, music, mirth, moisture, metamorphosis, vegetation growth, wine, ecstasy, sex, passion, instinct, emotions, death, resurrection, salvation, eternal life. Dionysus is cathartic and dark in the complete opposite sense. Apollo is the god of light, sky, order, rationality, piety, justice, hierarchy, tranquility, sobriety, logic, purity, and above all, prophecy and immutable destiny. But like Dionysus, also a god of the arts and music, albeit of a different kind. Apollo's music is like a classical orchestra, while Dionysus' music, the dithyramb, is more abstract and poetic, singing that accompanies dancing and mirth. Apollo's music is like a classical orchestra, while Dionysus is more like gangster rap or dubstep. Apollo is the embodiment of individual responsibility. You are given your lot from above, hierarchy. Dionysus is the embodiment of collective responsibility. Slaves become free through inspiration, equality. Both gods are sons of Zeus. Dionysus is associated with the underworld and the moisture that grows the crops from below the earth, while Apollo is associated with the heavens and the light that comes down. Athenian calendars marked half the year with Apollo, Lord of Light, bringing light, dry, sunny, the hottest 6 months, and Dionysus was marked as the Lord of the harvest, the cold, wet, and dark seasons. Friedrich Nietzsche, in The Birth of Tragedy, draws an excellent comparison of these gods and the symbiotic relationship between them, like yin and yang, whose primordial unity between Dionysian frenzy and Apollonian order can bring about a physiological state that allows one to create tragedy. Life itself is a tragedy. In this state, man enriches everything from his own abundance. Everything that he sees, that he wills, is increased, taught, made strong, overcharged with power. The man in this state transforms things until they reflect his power, until they are a reflection of his perfection. This drive for transformation into perfection is art. Nietzsche believed that the works of Pindar, Aeschylus, and Sophocles were the embodiment of the pinnacle of artistic expression and the true embodiment of tragedy. Nietzsche challenges excessive Socratic rationalism, arguing that the introduction of ethics and reason displaces the essence of tragedy, particularly the delicate balance between the Dionysian and Apollonian elements. This emphasis on reason was perpetuated by Plato in his dialogues, guiding the modern world toward prioritizing reason over the artistic energies inherent in the Apollonian and Dionysian contrast. Nietzsche also believed that Christianity, which he called Platonism for the people, was the result of Western culture straying too far from the artistic, tragic world of Saturn, who became a symbol of everything demonic and evil, the devil or the Antichrist. Saturn is the horror or annihilation of the principle of individuation, and at the same time, the one who enjoys its annihilation. It is pure liberation and freedom of expression. We see a similar dichotomy between Osiris and Seth, both sons of Ammon. Seth is the god of the dry desert who rules in the summer, and Osiris is the cathartic underworld god of moisture, vegetation, and darkness. When we look at Egypt, speculation is no longer needed for Dionysus, because both the Greeks and the Egyptians believed that Osiris and Dionysus were one and the same. For no gods are worshipped by all Egyptians in common except Isis and Osiris, whom they say is Dionysus. These they all reverence alike, Osiris being in the Greek language Dionysus. Herodotus, Book 2. Osiris, being translated, is Dionysus, and from the ancient Greek writers of mythology, some give Osiris the name Dionysus, Serapis, or with a slight alteration of the form, Sirius. Umalas, in his Bacchic hymn, speaks of our Dionysus, shining like the star Sirius, with a fiery eye in every ray, while Orpheus says, and therefore men call him effulgent, Osiris, and Dionysus. It is said Osiris also was interested in agriculture and discovered the cultivation of those fruits which were grown in Nysa, a city of Arabia Felix, near to Egypt, being the son of Zeus, and the name which he bears among the Greeks comes from both his father and his birthplace, since he is called Dionysus. Moreover, the Greeks dedicate ivy to Dionysus, and among the Egyptians it is called Chenos Siris, which means plant of Osiris, for Osiris and Dionysus are one and the same. Plutarch, on Isis and Osiris. Herodotus says that some say that Osiris is also portrayed with a deerskin cloak on his shoulders, in imitation of the sky studded with stars. This god wearing a deerskin, cultivating fruits, and wearing ivy is more than enough to understand why the ancients considered Dionysus and Osiris the same god. This brings us to Pluto, or Hades, also known as Dis Pater by the Romans, sometimes referred to as death. He is commonly associated with Osiris for obvious reasons. Both are rulers of the underworld who judge the dead, weighing the heart. But it turns out that Pluto and Dionysus were just as closely associated with the mystery cults of the Greeks. In some cases, Persephone and Dionysus were worshipped side by side. When we look at images of Pluto and Dionysus side by side from different vases from around the 6th century BC, we can see that they are identical. Both hold a thyrsus. Both wear diadems of ivy with grapevines and clusters. Pluto, which means wealth, is also named the divine child, just as Zagreus, the infant Dionysus, was the son of Demeter, who was pregnant by Iasion, who had intercourse with her in a thrice-ploughed field in the autumn, and was then struck and killed by Zeus with his thunderbolt. Iasion was considered another dying and resurrecting god of fertility and agriculture, and his son Pluto was closely associated with Hades and even considered, in some cases, to be one and the same. This story leads us to the very heart of the ancient mysteries. The Phrygian mysteries identify Iasion with Adonis and attribute to him the finding of the mysteries and cohabiting with the Great Mother. The Phrygian mysteries also attribute to Iasion the bringing of the gnosis of the secret mysteries to the island from Crete. Then, according to the Thracians, he had intercourse with Cybele instead of Demeter, and they begat Corybas instead of Pluto. Iasion is still killed by Zeus here instead of going to Phrygia. His son Corybas, together with Orpheus, son of Apollo and high priest of Dionysus, and Orpheus's son Musaeus, and the three of them went to Phrygia and found the Phrygian mysteries of the Great Mother and Adonis. Here Corybas gives his name to the initiates called Corybantes, and it is here that we find Dionysus called Sabazius, worshipped side by side with Cybele, the Great Mother. Diodorus in his library writes of this. This marriage of Cadmus and Harmonia was the first for which the gods are said to have furnished a wedding feast, and Demeter, being enamored of Iasion, presented him with the fruit of the corn. Hermes gave a lyre, and Athena a famous necklace and robe and flute and Electra, the sacred rites of the Great Mother of the gods, being called together with cymbals and timpani and instruments of her ritual. And Apollo played on the lyre, and the Muses on their flutes, and the rest of the gods uttered them fair words, and gave them their assistance in the celebration of the wedding. After that, they say, Cadmus, in accordance with the oracle he had received, founded Thebes in Boeotia, while Iasion married Cybele and begat Corybas. After Iasion had been translated into the circle of the gods, Cybele and Corybas delivered the sacred rites of the mother of the gods to Asia, and with them removed to Phrygia. Then Cybele, uniting with the first Olympus, begat Alce, and named the goddess Cybele after her own name, and Corybas gave the name of Corybantes to all who, in the celebration of the rites of his mother, acted like men possessed with Dionysus, and married Phoebe, the daughter of Coeus. In like manner also, he transmitted the flute from Phrygia to Lesbos, and the lyre which Hermes had given, and which Achilles later took for himself when he had captured that city. Many argue that the gods worshipped in Phrygia, as well as the Corybantes and Corybantes, are the same as the Curetes, and the Idaean dactyls, as well as the Caberi. But of the Caberi, they cannot say who they are. Strabo also says in Book 10, "These Corybantes of Ida are divine Dionysuses, who are ministers of the gods, transmitting the secret rites of Dionysus, and they are also called Satyrs, Silenus, Bacchus, and Theo." He says they are all inspired by Dionysus and are called Bacchic. These Corybantes are dancers who are in a frenzied ecstasy inspired by the god Dionysus. The Phrygians call them the Idaean dactyls, and they are considered the fingers of the right hand of Sabazius, Dionysus, since he can inspire them to move, and they carry out his will. Diodorus also says that Corybas was the father of Ida, the goddess whose sacred Mount Ida is named after, the mother of Musaeus, the first king of Crete, from whom the Minoans descended. Speaking of Mount Ida, Tacitus writes that the Jews were refugees from Crete, named after this mountain. It is said that the Jews were originally exiled from the island of Crete, who settled in the farthest parts of Libya at the time of the overthrow and expulsion of Saturn by Jupiter. The argument for this is the name. There is a famous mountain on Crete called Ida, and from there the inhabitants were called the Idaeans, which was later lengthened to the barbaric form Judea. The Thracian and Phrygian mysteries are considered the oldest by the Greeks, and at the head of them stands Orpheus, the Thracian bard. The Phrygians and Thracians are separated by the Bosphorus Strait, which is the border between Europe and Asia, the place where East and West meet. The mysteries of both the Thracians and the Phrygians are very similar, but the names of the deities may differ. For example, the great mother of the Thracians is Zelia, alluding to the divinity of Dionysus' mother, Semele. The son of Zelia is Zalmoxis. Zalmoxis is clearly the same god that the Phrygians call Sabazius. Both are depicted riding a horse, armed with lightning bolts. This proves that Zalmoxis and Sabazius were both influenced by Dionysus in their respective regions. Through linguistic analysis and the writings of Herodotus, we can truly see this as fact. Herodotus writes of Zalmoxis in Book 4 of his Histories. The Getae are the bravest of the Thracians and the most righteous. They believe that they are immortal, always live in the following sense. They think that they do not die, and that the one who dies joins Zalmoxis, a divine being. Some call this same being Gebelezes. Every 4 years, they send a messenger to Zalmoxis, chosen by chance. They ask him to say to Zalmoxis what they want. At that moment, the mission is accomplished as follows. The people standing there for this purpose hold 3 spears. Others take the one who is sent to Zalmoxis by his hands and feet, and throwing him into the air onto the spears, if he dies, pierced, they think that the divinity is going to help them. If he does not die, it is he who is accused. They declare that he is a bad man, and after he is accused, they send another. The messenger is informed of the request while he is still alive. The same Thracian at other times, when it thunders and flashes, shoots arrows at the sky and threatens the divinity, because they think that there is no other god than their own Zalmoxis. Zalmoxis, or Saloi, as Aristotle calls him, has etymological links to Dionysus through the name Zilia or Semela, meaning earth in Thracian or Dardanian, a clear connection to Dionysus. And more interestingly, Herodotus gives Zalmoxis a second name, Gebelesis. This breaks down into two words, Gaia and Zeus, showing links to Sabazius and the Thracian great mother Cybele. Herodotus once tells us that Gebelesis was also called Sabazius among the Goths of Jordanes, and he equated this god with Cronus and Saturn. Manasseh of Patras identified Zalmoxis with Cronus, making this connection even stronger, as both are underworld kings and judges of the dead who grant agriculture and equality to the poor and rich. Indeed, Dionysus, although Saturn's grandson according to Nonnus, possesses the same spirit. This brings our journey to the Germanic north. Zalmoxis survives in the pagan north for centuries. In the 13th century, Zalmoxis evolved into Zalus, and also the earth goddess Zilia, now called Zele, both venerated by Gothic pagans living in the far north as far as Lithuania. This would be the last surviving trace of the ancient Bronze Age religion of Dionysus. Zalus, father of Perun, married to his mother Zele, a deity linked to oaks, thunder, and lightning, like Zeus, shows that many of these ancient elements are still present in medieval Europe. Germanic relates to the Wiccan pantheons through linguistics, both tracing back to Proto-Indo-European. The gods Shiva and Dionysus are both depicted as young, beautiful, effeminate, both riding animals and wearing animal skins and carrying a magic staff or wand. Shiva, like Dionysus, is also known as a cathartic lord, associated with hearts, intoxication, and merriment. The Indian texts of Megasthenes, known as the Indica, written at the time of Alexander the Great, in which he calls Shiva an Indian Dionysus, or alternatively Eurydica, calls Dionysus a god of the East due to their similar use of the phallus in mysteries and intoxication via a sacred beverage. Kykeon and Soma may be made differently, but their goal was to get initiates into a state of ecstasy so that they could get inspiration from the god. What is even more striking when we look at the Phrygians and Dionysus, known as Sabazius, his name Sabazios has Proto-Indo-European roots tracing back to Savadev. This was put forward by Frans Cumont, a Belgian archaeologist, historian, and philology professor, PhD, who studied Mithras and Dionysus. He says Saba is from Proto-Indo-European SWEH1HI2, and that Shiva's name also shares a common root. Shiva, the two can be positioned, Shiva Dea or Sabadios, and we know that the Wiccan Aryans lived between the Black and Caucasian region, where Cybele is venerated. Again, all of this demonstrates just how ancient and widespread the Dionysian religion is. Mohenjo-Daro, 2350, 2000 BC. Archaeology shows a proto-Shiva as a horned god described as the lord of animals and plants. The most ancient form of Dionysus, according to Diodorus Siculus, comes from Asia, and some argue it may have been from this region, who is also horned and called the lord of animal husbandry. Diodorus says, some writers of myths, however, relate that there was another Dionysus who was far earlier than the first one mentioned by us. Sabazius, they say, also excelled in virtue and was the first to attempt to yoke bulls and by their aid to sow the seed. It is for this reason, they say, that they represent him as horned. Wiccan religion shows a direct link to these three medieval Lithuanian gods that evolved from Zalmoxis, Zeus, and Semele, through linguistic links, and also from the mythology itself. Indra, Mithra, and Varuna can be linked to these three. The Mithra-Varuna dichotomy is comparable to the Apollonian-Dionysian dichotomy that I explained earlier. But according to philologist John Davies, the Norse god Odin also has a connection to this duality of opposites. In my opinion, Odin's connection to the Dionysian is the most apparent, especially when looking at the etymology of his name. His name means frenzy, the inspiration that guided warriors and poets. He is associated with magic and intoxication. Additional Germanic equivalents stemming from wodas include Gothic wods, possessed, Old Norse order, raging, frantic, Old English wod, mad, frenzied, and Dutch woed, raging, wild, crazy, accompanied by substantive versions such as Old Norse order, mind, feeling, song, poetry. More Dionysian elements, Old English wod, sound, noise, voice, song, or Old High German wood, enthusiastic excitement, violent agitation, and Middle Dutch woed, rage, frenzy, all springing from the same root as the original adjective. Proto-Germanic wodas, frenzy, rage, and wodanan, to rage, can also be deduced. Philologist John D. Fry proposed that the Old Norse gods Odin and Ulla were likely originally linked, as seen in the dual form Ulla, Ul, and Odin, Oda. Wodas is a more archaic form of the fundamental origin of Odin's name. The Vanir, he further suggested, the deity of rage, Oda, Odin, was juxtaposed against the deity of magnificent splendor, Ulla, Ulrin, similar to the Wiccan differentiation between Varuna and Mithra. This dualism between Varuna and Mithra, as I compared earlier to Apollo and Dionysus, is relevant to Odin. In fact, I would argue that Odin is almost a perfect synchronicity between Dionysus and Apollo. Like Apollo, Odin is associated with prophecy, fate, justice, and order. Hugin and Munin are a pair of ravens that fly all over the world, Midgard, and bring information and messages to and from the god Odin. In Greek legends, ravens are messengers of Apollo and symbols of Apollo's prophecy. Herodotus says Apollo is most venerated by the Hyperboreans, the Germanics, and Odin also has a clear Dionysian side. He is the god of frenzy that grants inspiration. And like I mentioned, the connection to Saturn and Dionysus, Odin has even more Saturnian aspects to his character. Like Saturn, Odin is the All-Father who rules from the underworld, who gave the world a golden age before being sacrificed by Zeus for humanity, and plays a central role in the creation and destruction myths of the world. The return of Saturn marks the end of an age and the start of a new one. Odin checks all these boxes. He is the All-Father, linked to creation, the end of the world, and his death, like Saturn, makes him a judge of the dead of the gods. Julius Caesar writes that they claim descent from Dispater, a Roman underworld god, who was, in fact, Tyrrhenus. A connection to Dispater brings us back to Dionysus, Osiris, and Hades, and the Celtic Dispater also has a dual nature, with chthonic and celestial features, similar to the Apollonian and Dionysian dualism. Before I return to Dionysus, I must consider the commonly held identification of Odin with Mercury, which I believe is a bad one-to-one equivalent many people make. Julius Caesar also wrote, "Of all the gods, they worship Mercury in particular." Speaking of the Germanic tribes east of Gaul, Tacitus, 5 centuries later, in his Agricola, mentions the god Odin as Mercury, Thor as Hercules, Tiw as Mars, and Isis, Freya. And the old Roman day for Wednesday at the time was Mercury's day. So as the Germanic lands became more Romanized, they converted that day to Wednesday, or Odin's day. It is not without merit, though Tacitus did have strong reasons for this. Odin is a messenger, like Mercury, who also performs the role of psychopomp, transporting the dead to and from the underworld. We see this in the Egyptian Thoth, similar to Mercury and Thoth. Odin is also a god who gave humanity the runes, or the runic alphabet, and in Greek and Egyptian myths, it is Hermes, Mercury, or Thoth that gives humanity alphabets and hieroglyphs. One can argue that Odin has traits of Saturn, Mercury, Apollo, and Dionysus, and possibly was influenced by them. As Odin does appear much later in history, some think the image of Odin on horseback with a spear, flanked by 2 birds, is comparable to ancient depictions of Dardanian and Germanic gods that also have similar imagery, and they use this to argue that Odin must be much older. However, in my opinion, this simply brings us back to Dionysus through the depictions of Thracian Zalmoxis and Phrygian Sabazius. We clearly see that Zalmoxis and Sabazius are also depicted with horse riders, with spears, flanked by birds. In my opinion, it is more apparent that the Vanir, or frenzy, is a title that evolved into a name, stemming from the Sabazius of the Phrygians and Thracians. The symbol of Sabazius was the eagle. But where exactly did Sabazius come from? How old is Sabazius? Even the earliest mentions by Greek sources in the 5th to 6th century BC referred to Sabazius as a god of Thracian or Phrygian origin, and he was recognized as deeply ancient even at that time. In Athens, his sanctuary was particularly associated with Orphic and Eleusinian mysteries, where nocturnal initiation rites were performed, and initiates underwent purification via the application of mud and intoxication. Participation included a sacred beverage that was psychedelic wine mixed with ergot called Kykeon. This is known as ethnogenics, from the Greek ethnos and genesis, which means full of God or filled with God. The adjective entheos translates into English as full of God, inspired, and is the root of the English word enthusiasm. The correlation between Sabazius and Dionysus, consistently noted in Hellenistic documents, is undeniable. In the Orphic hymns, he is noted as interchangeable with Dionysus. However, inscriptions from Phrygia associate him with Zeus, and in North Africa, where his cult is documented from the 4th century BC onward, he may have been seen as a celestial deity, which led to his eventual association with the Semitic god Yahweh. Both had the Greek titles Theos Hypsos, God Most High, or El Elyon, to return to the Chaldean oracles. Dionysus, or Bacchus, was called by the Chaldeans Iao in the Phoenician language, and is often called Sabazius, as he who is over the 7 spheres, called the demiurge. It should be noted that the 3-letter Greek spelling of Yahweh, IAO, is exactly how the Old Testament god, Septuagint, was written, and he is often mentioned in Greek magical papyri as the supreme god. Plutarch, in his Symposiacs, claims that Yahweh is some Eastern form of Dionysus. While I admit that the one-to-one comparison is absurd, I believe that both Greek Dionysus and Jewish Yahweh have common elements in their Bronze Age origins. This is what Plutarch says. the time and matter of the greatest and most holy dominion of the Jews, do exactly correspond to the sacred rites of Bacchus, for what they call a feast, which they celebrate in the middle of the gathering of grapes, by setting tables laden with all sorts of fruits, while they sit under tents made of vines and ivy. And the day which immediately precedes this they call the Day of Tents. Within a few days after this, they celebrate another feast, not darkly, but openly devoted to Bacchus. For they have a feast among them called Choria, from the carrying of palms and thyrsi, when they enter into the temple carrying thyrsi. What they do within I do not know, but it is very likely that they perform rites of Bacchus. The first may be taken from their high priest, who on festivals enters into their temple with his mitre upon an ass, clothed in the skin of a fawn wrought about with gold, wearing buskins and garments hanging down to his ankles. Moreover, he has a great many little bells hanging at his garments, which make a noise as he walks along the streets. This corresponds to the Eleusinian priests. If you look at these claims, Plutarch is actually correct. The city of Pompeii was destroyed by a volcano in an eruption in 79 AD, and everything found there is clear archaeological evidence of the culture predating that eruption. It is like a perfect time capsule found in excavations at Pompeii. It is a picture of an Eleusinian hierophant, the high priest of Dionysus and Demeter, and he is depicted identically to how Plutarch says, which is also identical to the Levitical priest as described in the Bible from Exodus 28. Now the high priest has the specific ephod and robe, which goes to one person, but the other Levites are to wear what is described almost identically to the Eleusinian hierophants: white robes, gold and blue, and purple coats. They are to use gold, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and fine linen. Exodus 28. Make the ephod of finely woven linen embroidered with gold thread, and blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. The ephod must be made of 2 pieces, a front and a back, joined at the shoulders. The decorative sash must be made of the same materials as the ephod and be attached to it. Fasten 2 onyx stones on the shoulder pieces of the ephod to represent the names of the tribes of Israel. Engrave the names of the 12 tribes of Israel on the 2 stones, 6 names on each stone, in the order of their birth. Make chains of pure gold, twisted together like cords. Fasten the chains to the shoulder pieces of the ephod, connecting them to the 2 settings on the front. Make the breastpiece of judgment with the same materials and workmanship as the ephod. It must be made of finely woven linen embroidered with gold thread and blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. Make it of a single piece of cloth folded to form a square, 9 inches on each side. Then mount 4 rows of gemstones on it. The first row must contain a carnelian, a chrysolite, and an emerald. The second row must contain a turquoise, a sapphire, and an amethyst. The third row must contain a jacinth, an agate, and a crystal. The fourth row must contain a beryl, an onyx, and a jasper. These stones must be set in gold settings. Each of these stones must represent one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and the name of that tribe must be engraved on it like an inscription on a seal. For the breastpiece, make 2 rings of gold and attach them to the top corners of the breastpiece. Attach the 2 gold cords to the rings on the breastpiece and fasten the other ends of the cords to the gold settings on the shoulder pieces of the ephod. Make 2 other gold rings and attach them to the lower corners of the breastpiece on the inside edge next to the ephod. Then make 2 more gold rings and attach them to the front of the ephod, near the shoulder pieces, just above the decorative sash. Attach the lower corners of the breastpiece to the lower rings on the ephod with blue cords, so that the breastpiece rests securely on the sash. In this way, Aaron will carry the names of the tribes of Israel over his heart on the breastpiece of judgment whenever he enters the holy place. In this way, he will always remember the people for whom he must give account before the Lord. Aaron must put the Urim and Thummim inside the breastpiece, so they will be carried over Aaron's heart whenever he enters the Lord's presence. In this way, Aaron will always carry the Lord's decisions for the people of Israel over his heart, with loops between them. Golden bells and pomegranates shall alternate all around the hem of the ephod. Exodus 28. It's entirely possible that both the Levites and the Hierophants are passing down a shared tradition of the standard vestments of a high priest of an ancient tradition, to which both the Bacchic and the Jewish belong. I mentioned earlier that Pompey the Great had a coin made commemorating his conquest of Judea that said Bacchus Judaeus. Some believe this is the name of a person who Pompey conquered. Tacitus, however, says that Pompey entered the Holy of Holies and found nothing except a golden diadem of ivy, which Dionysus is known to wear in his legends. Some may ask, what about the second book of Maccabees that says, "Moreover, at the monthly celebration of the king's birthday, the Jews were, with bitter constraint, compelled to partake of the sacrifices, and when the feast of Dionysus was celebrated, they were forced to march in his procession, wearing wreaths of ivy." I think that the Greek Dionysus is so far removed from any Dionysian elements that we find in Judaism that they are no longer even remotely the same deity. And to me, this is more of a political issue. When the Romans had their version of Dionysus, Liber or Liberator in Latin, and we know he is present in Alba Longa in 496 BC, when Appius Claudius vowed sacred games in his honor. However, a group of Bacchanals from outside the Roman cult were still banned in 186 BC because of the political and social problems they caused for the Senate. Same God, opposing priesthoods that are causing problems. In fact, Antiochus Epiphanes, who the second book of Maccabees says established the procession of Dionysus in Jerusalem, also seems to have found something of interest. Manasseh of Patras wrote that in Antiochus, Epiphanes sacked the temple in 164 BC and found a gold statue of a man riding an ass. This image would immediately bring to mind, for anyone at the time, an image of Dionysus, who was often depicted riding an ass. And in the play The Frogs by Aristophanes, he rides to Athens on an ass before descending into the underworld. Vallius Maximus Smith wrote about an event that occurred in Rome regarding Jews being expelled from the city. Gnaeus Cornelius, a praetor, a ruler in the year of the consulate of Marcus Popilius, issued an edict ordering astrologers to leave Rome and Italy within 10 days, since, through the deceptive interpretation of the stars, they were spreading unstable and foolish minds, thereby profiting from their lies. The same praetor who forced the Jews, who were attempting to infect Roman custom with the cult of Jupiter Sabazius, to return to their homes. Here we see that the Romans equated Yahweh with Jupiter Sabazius, probably because of their similar customs and rites. There is a certain Mount Nysa, high, thickly covered with cedars, in Phoenicia, from afar, near the Egyptian waters. Supposedly, the Romans equated the Jewish Yahweh with Sabaoth or Io Sabazius, This could just be an incorrect employment of linguistics, but it could also mean that Sabazius and Sabat-O were already linked somehow. Sabazius in Thrace and Dacia, as well as with the Cimmerians, had a multitude of local names, including Ios, Panaos, Aralos, Balde, Aenos, Elites, Mitros, or Elenos, and Tastas. All of these various gods from different places of the Cimmerian world show undeniable links to Sabazius and Dionysus. These are all gods of ecstasy and gods of vegetation, and it shows how widespread the Dionysian religion of the Bronze Age was. I think the evidence is irrefutable and undeniable. The Great Mother figure in Phrygia is in archaeology dating back to 6000 BC. Note, this is a Stone Age goddess image guarded by two lions. The same image of Cybele appears in the later Greek and Roman era, also seated as a queen, flanked by two lions. And we even have a transitional form of this goddess in the Bronze Age. She's known to the Hittites as Kubaba, whom they considered the most ancient and sacred. The Hittites also depict her with Sabazius, although his name might have been different at the time. But he is still a god of ecstasy, surrounded by dancing maenads and wearing wreaths of ivy, again illustrating how ancient this religion was. The Phrygians preserved this image, and it was later adopted by the Roman Republic in the same image, flanked by these lions. Considering the fact that grape cultivation was discovered in this remote region of the world around 6000 BC, at the same time as this Kubaba or Cybele figure, it becomes possible and probable to me that the grape god was also born here. It's widely understood that grape cultivation and winemaking were imported from Anatolia by the Sumerians during the Copper Age. A legendary queen named Kubaba appears in the Sumerian king list during its prehistoric mythological epoch. She also has a grandson named Ur-Zababa. We also find that this dynasty worshipped the god Zababa, an ancient Iranian god who predated Nergal, whom Nergal replaced in the pantheon as the planet Saturn. The names Kubaba and Zababa, one of which, Kubaba, is identical to the Hittite Kubaba, and the other is close to Sabazius. But you might think, well, these are Iranians, and the Hittites are a branch of Proto-Indo-Europeans. In fact, these two names are some of the rarest cases of Sumerian names that are non-Semitic. Kubaba and Zababa are so ancient that they predate the Semitic Akkadians and are linked to northern languages. In fact, the Kykeon form of the logogram for Zababa is identical to the Hittite logogram for Sulin-Keta, a god who was worshipped in the Bronze Age side by side with Cybele as the king and queen of Hatti, and both stand next to lions. Again, we see religious influences of the most ancient forms of Anatolian Cybele and Sabazius, even in the most ancient Sumerian civilization. In Phrygia, Sabazius was considered a consort, and in some instances, a son of the Great Mother Cybele. Nonnus says, Hermes, in the eternal form of firstborn thighs, passed over the mountain range with a faster stride than her, carrying the child Dionysus, borne aloft in his arms, and gave him to Rhea, Cybele, nurse of lions and father of Zeus. Sabazius, in some instances, is the father of Dionysus, and in other instances, Sabazius is Dionysus. Dionysus also has a son with Aphrodite, named Priapus. Dionysus and Aphrodite, intertwined, were called Lucifer, and Priapus is the sacred child. Again, another title that we see with Dionysus. Priapus was a protector of vegetable gardens, and some think that gnomes are related to garden gnomes. His job is to guard the gardens. Priapus is depicted with a large phallus, due to the fact that the Dionysian phallus was a sacred symbol of the ancient mysteries and inner secrets. In the Orphic hymns, Priapus is also called Thais, and Thais is called Holy Priapus. The Orphic hymns associate the firstborn god Thais, who comes out of the abyss, unbegotten and without parentage, and he begets Uranus, Heaven, Saturn, Zeus, and Dionysus, who begets Priapus. The Orphics associate these gods as one god called Monad. The Orphic hymn to Protus, translated by Thomas Taylor from the 3rd century BC, states, "To Protus, Thais, fumigation from myrrh. O mighty Protus, firstborn, hear my prayer. Double egg, Elegor, Lucifer, and roaming through the air, roaring bull, glory in golden wings, from the house from which the race of gods immortal springs. Eric Pusus, celebrated might, unutterable, all glittering, thy flower, obscure mist, pure, all extending splendor, pure and holy light, hence dances, name the glory of heaven. On undulating pinions thou fliest through the world, Priapus, dark-eyed, splendor, genial, benevolent, ever-blessed king, with joyous aspects on these divine and sacred rites propitious shine." The Orphics were some of the first to produce what one would describe as monotheistic tendencies, meaning that all of these gods, the gods descending from Thais down to Priapus, the son of Dionysus, are one spirit, and they're all in the same bosom. This brings me to my final section, Dionysus and Christianity. Clement of Alexandria says, "God in the womb is a countersign of the mysteries of Sabazius to the initiates." Clement reports, "This is a serpent passed through the bosom of the initiates." The Orphic egg with a serpent coiling around it was a symbol of the Orphic god Dionysus, giving his inspiration to Orpheus, Thais being the firstborn, and Dionysus being the final prince, begetting Priapus. And what Clement of Alexandria is saying in this context, Clement is comparing Jesus as the Son of God in the bosom of God the Father. Like the Phrygians, believe the same regarding Dionysus and Sabazius being God the Father and Son in the bosom. Phrygia was a thriving region for early Christianity at this time. Sabazius evolved into a more Middle Platonic monotheistic form called Theos Hypsistos. The Hypsisterians are a group who lived in Cappadocia and Phrygia that worshipped this god without images in the temple, and he was represented by an eagle. The eagle, as his symbol, has roots in his earlier forms. Gregory of Nazianzus was once a Hypsisterian initiate who converted to Christianity when he married Saint Nonna. And of course, he was known as a Trinitarian theologian who was a major contributor to the idea of the Trinity becoming the Christian Godhead. To the Phrygians, Dionysus and Zeus were one, Zeus Sabazius, with a Saturnian spirit that linked them. These ideas are heavily inspired by Zoroastrian theology in the Chaldean oracles, with some excerpts attributed to Zarathustra, Pythagoras, others to Plato, and the rest being attributed to Neoplatonic theorists living at the court of Marcus Aurelius. It states the following passage: "All things are governed by the Father in the bosom of the intelligible triad." And again, the Father has torn apart every spirit out of this triad. Perrin said, "The summit of the intelligibles is the intelligible triad containing within itself the cause and essence of all triads. Thus, he who knows himself knows all, as Zarathustra first affirmed in his Gothas, and then Plato in the first Albi. All things are the progeny of one fire, one divine nature. The monad is there first, where the fatherly monad abides. The monad is extended, which generates two, the logos, the born light. This is the operator, bestowing life-bearing fire. He fills the life-giving bosom of the angel, Helion, the angel love, Eros, who first sprung from the intellect, clothed in fire, linked with fire. The father Saturn hastily retired from all connection with matter. The Doada sits with Jupiter and scintillates with intellectual sections, together with the power of governing all. Dionysus, or Bacchus, was called by the Chaldeans Iako in the Phoenician language, and often called Saba, as one over the seven spheres, called the Demiurge. The triad, the Demiurge, created the entire world from fire, water, earth, and all nurturing air. What the Pythagoreans intended to signify by the monad, the duad, and the triad, pertaining to Saturn, Jupiter, and that which is mixed of both, indivisibly united. Dionysus. We also have texts from early Christians in the pre-church period who cite Pythagoras and use similar concepts for Jesus and God the Father. Now Pythagoras proclaimed that the unbegotten monad was the principle of the universe and the parent of the duad and the other, and of all the other numbers. And he says that the monad is the father of the duad, and the duad is the mother of all begotten things, and the bearer of those begotten. Zarathustra, also a teacher of Pythagoras, calls thee one father, but two mothers, for the duad proceeded from the monad, according to Pythagoras, and the monad is first male, but the duad is female, and second, like Adam and Eve. From the duad, again, Pythagoras says, proceeds the triad. Hippus, adhering firmly to the Pythagorean doctrine of the beginning and remembering what others say, says that he is alone, without wife, without woman, and needs nothing at the beginning. Nothing was begotten, but the Father was alone, unbegotten, having neither place nor time nor counselor, nor anything else which could be understood as an essence by any figurative speech. But he was alone, solitary, as they say, and rested alone within himself. And when he was full of fruit, he thought fit to beget and bring to perfection what was fairest and most perfect that he had within. For he did not love to be alone, for he was all love, and love is not love unless there is something which can be loved. Then the Father himself begat, being alone, mind. Truly, this is the duad, which became the mistress, and beginning and mother of all the aeons, counted by them as being within the pleroma. But Nous and Eloa, being projected by the Father, the fertile projection from the fertile, imitating the Father, also projected word, logos, and life, Zoe. Valentinus, who lived from 100 to 180, was an extremely popular Christian theologian who was once a follower of Phys, a woman who traveled the world with Paul. He was also the runner-up for Bishop of Rome after the death of Pope Alexander III, losing a narrow vote to the next pope, Anicetus. Being only 2 disciples removed from Paul, he taught that God the Father, the Logos, and Zoe were a trinity. This type of theology is certainly present among the Phrygian Sabazius worshippers. Addis, the Phrygian eunuch who died and was resurrected due to the blessings of Cybele and Sabazius, was also identified with Dionysus in several sources. For Corybant was stolen by Pluto, that is, the sun, going under the earth at the time of sowing. But Dionysus begins to germinate in accordance with the terms of the power which, being young, is hidden under the earth, but produces fair fruits and is an ally of the power in the flower symbolized by Addis, and in the cutting of the ripening grain, symbolized by Adonis. Poets. Clement of Alexandria said, "For those 2 identical thighs, having abstracted that chest in which the phallus of Bacchus was deposited, conveyed it to the Etrurian city, dealers and noble traffickers, Truly, they lived there as exiles, being occupied in propagating the precious doctrine of their superstition and exhibiting phallic symbols in a chest, in order that tyrants might worship them. And some think, not without reason, that on this account Dionysus was called Dionysius, because he was mutilated. The unity amongst these sons of gods was very popular. By the 1st century, Jesus is depicted in the Gospels as a new Dionysus, saying in his parables, "I am the true vine, my Father is the vine dresser," and supplanting Dionysus as the vine. He also performs miracles, PR turning water into wine, which was a legend once told of Dionysus. Pausanias says, the Andrians affirm that every year at the festival of Dionysus, wine flows of its own accord from the sanctuary. Again, in Book 6, he relates, between the marketplace and the Menneus in the city of Elis are an old theatre and a sanctuary of Dionysus. The image is a work of Praxiteles. The Elins reverence Dionysus above all the gods, and they assert that the god visits their festival. 3 kettles are brought into a building by priests and deposited empty in the presence of citizens and any strangers who may chance to be in the country. The building's doors are sealed by the priests themselves and by any others who may be so inclined. On the morrow, they are allowed to examine the seals, and on entering the building, they find the kettles or cauldrons filled with wine. The miracle at the wedding at Cana. Jesus turning water into wine would immediately catch the attention of anyone who was aware of the Dionysian cult. The ideas of the Trinity or the Triad are completely Platonic and much older than Christianity. The idea of Saturn, Zeus, and Dionysus being one, flanked by an army of angels, is what we see in Christianity with Jesus, the Father, and the Holy Spirit. Even the Christians themselves in the 2nd century, where we see evidence of them drawing these comparisons, noticing the similarities between Jesus, Dionysus, or Jesus and Attis. In fact, a 2nd century Christian named Nano, a preacher, sang a hymn about Jesus that said, "Whether thou be Kronos' blessed child, or son of Zeus, Dionysus, or of great Rhea, Attis, the morning star of Rhea, the Assyrians call the desired Adonis, all Egyptian wisdom, Osiris, male heavenly horn, the Scythians call thee Adam, the Corphantes, Corybant, the Phrygians, Papa sometimes, and sometimes the dead god, or unfruitful, or Apos, or the green-reaped harvest ear, or fruit that Mary Magdalene bore, man, trumpeter, Jesus Christ." And thus, the Dionysian elements are so pervasive throughout time that they evolve into new gods and cults throughout the world. Justin Martyr understood how influential this was to the story of Jesus and wrote, "The devil, having learned these mysteries from the Greeks, to mock Jesus, the devils, accordingly, when they heard these prophetic words, said that Bacchus was the son of Jupiter, and declared that he was the discoverer of the vine, and they adduce wine or an ass as pertaining to his mysteries. And they taught that, having been torn in pieces, he ascended to heaven." Justin apology. Justin understood that these symbols were Dionysian, and so he's the first apologist, because what he's saying is completely in defense of his own faith, that he has political reasons to worship Dionysus. Worship of Dionysus continued in the Eleusinian mysteries until the 5th century AD, starting in the Mycenaean Bronze Age period. Christians couldn't find a better way to supplant them than to somehow adapt them. There was a legend created of a mystery initiate named Demetrius, who had a dream of Demeter telling him to worship Jesus and turn the Eleusinian mysteries into a church. which actually happened, and that church still exists today. Of Orpheus, the high priest of Dionysus, there are also many legends written by Christians turning him into a saint. And in the oldest Christian catacombs, we can see Orpheus playing his lyre next to Jesus and Mary. Orpheus is also present in the Chaldean oracles of the 1st and 2nd centuries, demonstrating the close proximity of Orphism, Judaism, and Christianity. And for these reasons, Dionysus is the most pervasive god in history. You have achieved true gnosis,